And welcome to another episode of All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Harper. Surprise, surprise. I'm loving doing these podcasts. I'm loving the people I'm meeting. Some of these discussions are really informative and engaging and sometimes a bit radical. And today on the episode, we have Lukasz Konieczka, who is the founder and chief executive of Mosaic, which is a charity that supports LGBT plus young people. He's an encyclopedia on social justice, on capitalism, on how things work in society. And I'm really interested in his views, and I hope you will be too. So let's jump into the conversation. Well, Lukasz, amazing, and welcome to All Things Conflict. And thank you so much for offering to come on the show and share your wisdom. So we've known each other quite a long time, haven't we, from a community work in the London Borough of Brent. And I remember you as being, and I know you as being the encyclopedia for all things LGBT plus, and also your absolute care for all humans and particularly young people and how they're progressing through society. So I'd love you to just talk a little bit about yourself.
Oh, do you have a week? This is now a podcast about me all of a sudden. So, yes, my name is Lukasz Konieczka. I'm originally from Poland, but I have been in London for, 20 years, and I feel like we know each other for a very long time. But kind of without betraying my age, I feel like our paths seem to be crossing ever so often, which I find fascinating in this sector, because I think it's not only within the LGBT plus community that is something somewhat confined, but also within the third sector and Brent. I think there's a lot of things that came out of Brent that I absolutely adored. I used to work for youth services as a project manager. I was a victim of redundancies in 2016, which kind of affected the whole department. And then I decided to set up a charity, which is Mosaic LGBT Plus Young Persons Trust, to carry on delivering the work that we were already delivering, because I felt it was really important to have something in place that wasn't closing, because everything else was closing at the same time. And when I was doing continuity of care assessments for my young persons, it was transparent to me that there was nowhere for them to be referred to. So I was like, well, I'll just set up a charity. How difficult could it be? Ignorance is a bliss, so it happens, as I like to say, because it was far more difficult than I anticipated, which I'm glad I have anticipated less stress than it was, because I'm not sure I would have been prepared for it otherwise. And since then, the organization has grown massively. We are serving more young persons than ever. We expanded our age range. We now work with 12 to 18-year-olds, as well as 18 to 25-year-olds who identify as lesbian, gay, bi, or trans, or plus. So that's a whole alphabet community we are covering. We pride ourselves on being refugee and asylum-seeking persons inclusive. We pride ourselves on being intersectional in our approach, in our pedagogical approach. I lecture on this and intersectionality of LGBT plus community at several universities, and I also do EDI consultancy. And I feel it's quite important that we all start thinking creatively about how we can make sure that the world that we are building today is better tomorrow.
It's really fantastic. And I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, I started a charity, and if we'd known, we know how tough it is, maybe you wouldn't embark on it. So it's great that we go into these things with total innocence and naivety. But you've done an amazing set of work. And you've also, I think you've got a TEDx talk, haven't you? In case
I
people want to
do.
find out more, I would like to squeeze, perhaps you can say something about that. I'd like to squeeze that in.
Sure. Oh, yes. I sometimes forget to self-promote because of the work that I do. It's so about the young person centered, that I'm not a very good person at like self-promotion, which I feel I'm losing out in this social media era. But yes, I was asked to do a TEDx, and I decided to do it on belonging. And I designed a belonging framework because I felt it was quite important to be pragmatic about how can we foster a sense of belonging this specific TEDx is about fostering this sense of belonging for LGBT plus young persons. But since then, I have used it across different sectors and across different organizations, including the corporate world and in my consultancy work. And it has transpired very quickly that it's actually extremely efficient in making sure people understand what belonging really means and what behaviors contribute to
Mm.
people feeling that they belong in the organization. So that actually surpassed my expectations, I think is the phrase I'm going to go with, because I just designed it specifically for LGBT plus young persons, but it actually has been very impactful across the board.
Amazing. Yeah, lovely. And I think what we'll try and do is put a link to it in the show notes or something. I'll try and make sure we do that. Um, but I suppose what I want to do, you've introduced yourself really well, and it's, I know of old what, I mean, I don't like the word expert, but you are an expert in this field. You have a lot of wisdom. But I guess, could you just briefly paint a picture of maybe what a typical young person arriving at Mosaic may need or may display, or what presents, and then what care you might give them, and how that can transform, their progress through life?
I wish my job was as easy as a typical young person, because I think even trying to put them into subgroups would have been a difficult task.
Mhm.
Such wonderful individuals, and I think that's partly why we're called Mosaic. Because people always ask us why we're called Mosaic, and I like to say the poetic explanation for it is because we bring colorful pieces together, and that's exactly what it is. So I think every single young person presents a different set of needs. I think the one common denominator that we find amongst LGBT plus young persons is the fact that they are looking for a space where they can feel safe, and they are looking for a space where they can connect with other LGBT plus young persons. And that I think is really important and has been a foundation of what we do. Our young persons really benefit from having a community space that is very much focused on their experiences, members of LGBT plus community. And the bonus of that, and kind of the part of the pedagogy as well on top of that, is to give them learning. And for us, it is quite important that young persons learn about the past, so the history of LGBT plus community, our struggles, so that they are able to build the resilience and be prepared for any struggles that might be thrown at them in the future. Because, if we do learn from our past mistakes and successes, then I think we're building a far more resilient and far stronger community for the future challenges that are already being thrown at us. Let's not kid ourselves. I think we were always thinking, well, at one point it's going to happen where the winds of change are going to blow against us. And I think we're already in that predicament, it seems.
Yeah, so I was really interested when you said, if there was one commonality, it's about a space where young people can feel safe in their identity or their experiences. And I think I'm going to push this along a bit, and say, well, what are the areas in which LGBT plus young people don't feel safe? What is it about our society that doesn't provide that level of safety?
Well, I think today I would say the narrative in the media is definitely transphobic. So a lot of young persons who are questioning their gender identity are finding it quite difficult to navigate the fact that we are living in a world post caste review, which has been internationally condemned as absolutely um, unhelpful, I think is the most politically correct term I'm allowed to use. Unhelpful for the trans young person specifically, but also there is kind of continuous attacks on trans access to sports, for instance. We have just recently seen the Olympic Committee kind of banning the trans women from women's sports and stuff like that. Like that it's just continuous efforts of the world to carry on oppressing the trans community specifically. With LGBT community, which is, I think I'm going to draw the distinction here because the experiences are quite different for those reasons. We can see international an issue, right? Because there's so many countries that are now issuing more regressive legislation, Turkey being one of them. We are seeing this happening in Burkina Faso. We're seeing it happening across the world, where actually people are trying to roll back the rights. The fact that the lesbians are going to be taken out of the children's birth certificates in Italy was kind of attempted. So there's a lot of things that are happening across the world, and I feel like we are experiencing this pendulum. It feels is swinging back, and those things, although are happening abroad, I think they are registering with us on the subliminal level because it is about us, it is about our community. And although it might not be happening here yet, I think people are already anticipating it will at some point, because it feels that, especially when you look at politics and have how things are swinging towards the right, and we know what the party that shall not be mentioned, because I will not give them platform here, and I don't believe they deserve the platform or to be mentioned, that are actually now leading in polls are ultra conservative, and we know they are not LGBT plus friendly. So we know that this is going to have a massive impact on LGBT plus community. And I do believe that to a very high extent, the trans people and the most vulnerable in society are always canaries in the mine. And I do believe that trans women specifically are always the first ones to get attacked. So when we are talking about feminism, when we are talking about progress, when we're talking about rights, we must remember that we are not able to progress unless we are all able to progress. Because oppression doesn't, you can't laser focus oppression, right? We know that from statistics, because guess what? Metropolitan Police statistics, any other statistics from across the world, you learn one thing from them. If one hate crime goes up, they all go up. Right? So we know that when oppression of trans women increases, the racial hate crime increases, the ableist hate crime increases, the femicide increases. And people ask, oh, why is that the thing? Well, the correlation doesn't mean causation, clearly, one doesn't necessarily mean. We kind of open the floodgate of hate, and those very often will take with it everything that comes on its path. So although obviously we do understand as people who are, from scientific backgrounds, that one doesn't necessarily clearly leads to another. We know that when we allow that narrative to be exercised in public spaces, in public discourse, then that's exactly what's going to happen. The hatred will be brewed, and and the next person who looks differently, sounds differently, or presents differently will be the one who gets the impact, the brunt of that hate. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a trans woman at this particular moment in time. It can be a woman who simply doesn't like womanly enough. And we've seen it. We've seen it in the media. There was a coverage of a woman with double mastectomy who was not allowed to access to women's changing rooms. So we can see that actually transphobia has got real life impact on women who are not womanly enough in the eyes of the beholder, because whatever that means is to be explained by those who are holding those transphobic views. So I think there's something really problematic that we are facilitating in this public narrative, because I do believe there's something really powerful about us all saying, well, just no to hate. That we just need to create spaces which are welcoming to people regardless of who they are. And I think that is precisely where we should be heading, but we are not.
Yeah, so there's really something very crucial and interesting about listening to you, because while your particular wisdom, the charity that you run, is based on LGBT plus and trans, and and that world of providing care in a world that often doesn't care, what you're actually showing us is that it affects everyone. So you might be putting your resources and efforts into one particular group, but actually it affects everyone. Anyone who shows any difference in any part of the world, even if that's not where your resources are. And I think that that's really important for us to understand.
People very often don't understand the work that we do. And it is very often quite obscure to people, which I do understand. But what I try to explain to people, there's a lot, so I'm hoping that your listeners or viewers might be able to connect with that as well, is that essentially what I'm trying to do is to work
Mm,
with the community where I have the sphere of influence, right? I
mhm,
have the influence over LGBT plus young persons. So I believe this is my role, this is my job to make sure that that any kind of hints of sexism, gender-related violence, racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, like any form of
mhm,
oppression is challenged in them. So that they are, when they are leaving my care and they become adults in a wonderful world, hopefully better world than
mhm,
the one that is kind of being painted currently. But I think there is something really important about kind of making sure that we work and create that community of the future that is actually far more inclusive and respectful, right? But this is my sphere of influence, right? What people don't understand and very often confuse is just, yes, I work with LGBT plus young persons, but what I'm trying to do here is to make sure that they are not the ones doing oppression. Just because they are
mhm,
queer does not mean that they are somehow magically protected
mhm,
from any form of bias or any form of prejudice, any form of stereotype. That is not how the world works, right? So
mhm,
unfortunately, they do bring this stuff from mainstream media. They bring in and some things that they say might be Islamophobic, some things that they say might be ableist, some things that they say might be
mhm.
racist. You know, all those things that they come with, we have to then unpack and make sure that they are leaving us a bit more inclusive, a bit more respectful, a bit more progressive. And therefore, we're building the community of the future that is doing that. I could have I could have run an organization that speaks from the position of pain. So we are
Mhm,
an LGBT plus organization, and therefore this is the pain that we're experiencing as LGBT plus people, and therefore we campaign for LGBT plus liberation.
mhm,
Right? What we are not, and Mosaic LGBT plus young persons trust has been having those conversations over the years. We are not a campaigning organization. Right. So we do not campaign for LGBT. We contribute our viewpoint. We contribute our young person's viewpoint. We very often respond to
mhm.
consultation. We very often deliver training. So we do make sure people understand the experiences of young persons, but we're not campaigning organizations, so we would not be speaking from the position of pain. We're speaking from the position of power, right? So, and our power rests with our young persons, right? So when I work with position of power and I work with my young persons, and I'll make sure that they are the best that I can do, right, under circumstances with my resources and making sure that they are having all of their prejudices, or I don't know if all, but like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can see are challenged. Then I feel like I'm doing the job of making sure that they at least are not the source of the problem, but the source of the solution.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing because, and it's great to recognize that, just because people who are oppressed come into a space, they too may oppress others. We're trying to look at the philosophy because, I hold that, we're indoctrinated in a system that I call domination culture. And that one of the goals of one of the ways domination culture feeds itself is to pick a small group of people and tell them they're no good or not good enough. And it doesn't matter where you look, whether you look in the school. Interesting enough, in prisons, I did work in prisons, and prisoners will find a group of people to say are not good enough. Will always look to exclude as if it can't understand its own identity unless it's related to who we hate.
I think there is something really poignant here. There's something about understanding ourselves in opposition to something else,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Like the mainstream narrative does this as well. Like, I think it is colonial in nature on fronts, because essentially like we are supreme and you are not supreme. Like, that's kind of how racism was constructed, right? As an ideology. The whole idea of class, UK is a very interesting case study on class. Because if you think about, the fact that we still have aristocracy and 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 a prince who is now no longer a prince, it's it's a very interesting it's a very interesting time because essentially what we are saying is that those people are born into the righteousness of their position, but actually now what we learned is that actually those can be taken away. So, maybe there was a conversation to be had. But I think there's something really important about us recognizing actually there is something colonial about that differentiation. And I think it's divide and rule that has worked for colonies across the world. You will go in and be like, oh, look at these
Mm,
people. They're here to, take your stuff while you are the one taking all the stuff, but you're starting the conflict on the ground. So they're preoccupied with that conflict while you do all your business in the background. You know what I mean? Robbing them blind. So I think there was something really important about us recognizing that actually we do have to stay united. We do have to stay connected with our collective humanity, because I always find it quite strange. People are like, well, trans people would indoctrinate children. I'm like, I actually know trans parents. And in a moment of vulnerability, I'm not going to say their name because obviously protection or whatever, but like th they said to me, like, I don't want my child to be trans because it's
mhm,
really hard. It's
mm,
it's very painful physically,
mm,
emotionally, society, it's really hard. Like, would I want my child? Like, I wouldn't wish it on my enemy. They don't understand how
mhm.
painful this is, the process of going through it, the growing up with it. So, and they actually grew up in the golden years, if you excuse the pun. So I think there is something really important about us recognizing the fact that it is not easy, and it's nobody is like, oh, here was a leaflet. Why don't you become trans person? That is not what even we're doing. Like, we would not do that. We would recognize a person's wishes because we want to make sure they've got sense of agency. Because the last thing you want is to take away somebody's agency. You cannot take anybody's agency. There was a research when I used to work in a nursing home in my previous life, and there was a piece of research that crossed my desk. And it showed very clearly that if you are offering residents in your home an option, a choice of lunch, it can be you would like a salad, or would you like chips? Would you like any form of choice? If you present them, even with fake, just would you like to wear this cardigan or this cardigan? If you give them a sense of choice, the sense of agency, they live longer,
Mm.
right? And they
Yeah,
thrive because they feel like they have sense of self in this space that is actually extremely controlled. It is very artificial. It is not very humane on many levels because we're not designed to just live amongst a certain group of people with the same age and
yeah,
our conditions, because it actually can be exacerbating on many levels, as the research is now telling us. So there's a lot of problems with the setup, but nevertheless, they still thrived more than people who were not offered that choice. One would question the ethics of that research, considering its findings. But I think there's something really important about us recognizing that. And if we are taking that away from children, if we're taking it away from young persons, it is extremely dangerous. And it's dangerous for one more reason, I can tell you. Those people who are concerned out there, I recognize the concern because I think people sometimes forget that we are also concerned about young persons' well-being, and we would do nothing to harm the young persons that we work with. But what we found was something very interesting, that the trans young persons who were not offered the space to have the sense of agency and choose their name, choose their gender pronoun, and this name and the gender pronoun being respected, right? They preoccupied themselves, because remember, that's adolescence, right? So everything is about conflict and very much is away
mhm,
from family and to the peers, right? So that's the backdrop, right? What happened in this equation was they got preoccupied with the conflict with the prime carers, right?
yes.
Instead of looking in and seeing that actually feel right, right? Because they were now so preoccupied with
Mhm,
the conflict, like, they don't respect me, and therefore blah 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 blah. So like all of the energy is just channeled into that conflict, right? Which is not helpful, versus actually creating a space where you are creating a space where young person is able to reflect and is able to um, think about, how does it feel? Does this name work for me? Does this gender pronoun work for me? I have had young persons who have had a go because we created a space and environment where they were able
mm,
to, and then they were like, actually, no, that's not me. I thought it was, but it's not. And very often giving them that space can be beneficial. If you don't, then you are just creating an environment that you think is safe because you are trying to delay the decision, but you're actually making it worse, because then they are, we all need it, to just dig their heels in, don't they? Because, challenging teenagers can be difficult at best of times. So, and not giving them choice and not giving them the sense of agency can be counterintuitive.
I think there's so much there to unpack, and I'm trying to like compute where do I want to go. Um, but I think there was something I want to go back to when you said, we're coming from a position of power and not a position of pain. Because one of my theories is that when you come from a position of pain, because in our society, we love a good victim, we love victim mentality, but that actually is still playing into the domination culture mainstream philosophy, that there are actually playing into the power imbalances. And so, what I'm hearing you say is actually let's start from an inner reflection and finding ourselves and managing our inner pendulum and managing our inner compass, and start from finding who we are, so that when we go out into the world, we're not going out into the world from a place of defiance and belligerence and hostility, because that will not get us anywhere. That just poisons me.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that the best way that I've seen it kind of present itself in a lot of my training sessions or conversations that I have had is when you ask people about their privilege, right?
Mm,
And they're like, well, I don't have any privilege. I come from a working class background. That's position of pain, right?
yeah,
You
yes,
know that because it hurt, right?
yes.
Because it was difficult, um, because it was challenging, because it demanded of your resources, and energy to overcome. And that's fair. That builds character. That is quite important. And that's part of you. That's part of your makeup. There's nothing wrong, and it doesn't deny your pain and struggle when you admit and recognize that you actually do have areas of privilege that actually come with power, right?
Yes.
I'm white. That's the area of privilege, right? I'm 6'3", so obviously, clearly, when I walk into the room, people very often have assumed that I work there or I'm a manager or something, because people ask me questions as if I
Mhm,
stuff, and well, I don't know, but there's this assumption that when you descend upon the room, that people
mhm,
Totally. And it happens to me quite frequently, I must add. Maybe because the way I carry myself, I don't know, but I walk with confidence because again, that whiteness and that height and my able body allows me to kind of stride in kind of quite noticeably into the space. So I think it is quite important that we recognize that those things are part and parcel of our experiences, and I can use them and ignore them, and kind of benefit from them without actually paying any attention to the fact that actually at the end of the day, they are contributing to the way I function within the society, right? I can just
mm.
coupons and be like, well, it's all my completely ignoring everything else, right? I could do that. Or I can utilize it and make sure that I use it to benefit the people who are not benefiting from the same stuff. I can use my whiteness to challenge racism.
Mhm,
I can use my, well, I wouldn't say masculinity, but my manhood, because that's two different things. My manhood to challenge sexism. I can use my European roots to challenge any kind of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia that is presented to
mm,
people who are not experiencing the same thing in the same on the same multiverse as
mm,
I am. Um, and yes, I could just sit there being like, well, look at me, I'm so hardworking, and I could say, well, I'm a foreigner. I set up a
yeah.
charity because of my hard work, pat myself on the back and say how great I am, right? But actually, there was a lot of effort from a lot of people around me, and there was a lot of support that I have received. And I have no way of telling how much of it was because I was white, and how much of it was because people
Mm,
told me previously in my career in brand new services. I don't know how much of it was because I'm a man. I don't know how much of it is because I'm told. I've read this statistic somewhere that majority of the world CEOs are actually very tall.
mhm.
Kel Surprise. Um, and I didn't know that, and there's something really weird about our psyche that we kind of are, the fact that we're looking up to people, even in our language, like you look up to people, right? And you do not have a choice but look up to me, right? Because, um,
Mhm,
so I think there's something really important that we have to recognize that those things are part and parcel of our experiences. And there's nothing wrong with you recognizing where your power is, as well as your pain is, and making
mhm.
you utilize both of them whenever the work is needed, because we do need to understand that there's some level of pain. I think we do need to connect with some pain. There is a benefit in vulnerability, in true authentic vulnerability. And I find that quite difficult for me, because I feel like you can't be vulnerable. You have to be you're a CEO of the organization. You have to be always strong, and I've got this like
Mm.
internal narrative kind of coming in, like you came from abroad, like you have to be strong and stable. So there's something the polar opposite in me that I have to challenge, and I have to sometimes be like, well, actually, maybe I made a mistake here. I do feel really bad about it. Like, kind of coming with this with full self. Um, and there is nothing wrong with admitting areas for development and areas for work, and recognizing that those two stories being written inside of us at the same time, and that is part and parcel of our experience.
Yeah, I love listening to you, Lucas. I think what came up for me as I was listening was when we talk about our pain and using our pain as learning and not wielding it. But how I talk about this is I say that there's work that we ignore in groups, which is to talk about the grief of being human. There is just, no matter how wonderful your life is, no matter where you are in the scale of privilege or whatever, or poverty, there is a grief to being human. And I don't think we recognize that. And what we do is we split off and separate into, my pain because of who I am. For example, my family are Maltese. And, I still know people who were beaten for speaking Maltese when they were children because, it was colonized by the British. I I took a friend of mine who's now sadly died, but he was a very big black Nigerian man who knew all about gangs. And I told him that I wanted to take him down to Tate Modern to open up another world. I wanted him to see a Cubism exhibition to see how it relates to some of the graffiti, that you could make that link. Um, and he was 6'5" tall, and I was walking next to him in an area of London that he doesn't normally inhabit. And I was really shocked at how people were reacting to seeing him, because I was walking next to him and I'd never done that in that area of London. And it was such a revelation to see people crossing the road, looking away. So his experience is nothing like my experience. It's really interesting. Um, so I think there's something about the grief of being human, and how domination culture makes us turn that on each other. What happens to you when you hear me say that?
Um, I kind of so I always like to hear you speak as well, and I always find it quite interesting. And when you say the grief of being human, like on a emotional level, I was like,
Mm,
yeah, because there's something really important that connects us all, right? This kind of
mm,
experience of common humanity, right? And we're kind of divided into this subsections, because we are essentially tribal, right? We're essentially tribal humans, right? And this is why it is so easy to divide and rule us, because people will be always like, look at those, Muslims coming here, taking our
mm.
jobs while claiming benefits. Clearly, those are not mutually exclusive somehow for some newspapers that also shall remain nameless. So I think there's something really poignant about the fact that actually we do have to connect with humanity, and I think there's a level of emotional connection that I'm making with your statement. However, the Marxist within me is
Go
screaming
there.
so loudly into my ear, and is kind of uh, more inclined to disagree, because I think there is something about I would say there's only one divider that matters, and it's rich versus poor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I think it's very important for us to say who is rich, right? I think
Yes.
if you have to go to work to make a living, you are not considered to be rich, right? If you do have to wake
Mm-hmm.
up every morning and go do whatever you're doing, investment
Mm-hmm.
banking included, we might have conversations about investment banking, but but generally
Yeah.
speaking, have to get up in the morning and go to work, you're not considered to be rich. If you wake up in the morning and the breakfast being brought to you by servants and your private jet is waiting for you to take to whiz you off into somewhere else, then we're having a different conversation. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's something really important about the fact that I think, in my view, equality, diversity, and inclusion work struggles to now build a case for a common connection, right? And I think there's something really important about us all recognizing that actually um, uh, the Black person, the Jewish person, the Muslim person, the white Polish person, the Maltese, we all work for a living, and our living conditions, as we speak, are deteriorating. Right, the cost of living crisis is us out. The cost of water is going up. The railway in Britain is despicable. So, like, we are being squeezed left, right, and center. We have more people now who are not able to afford housing. And even if you are able to afford housing, it is not going to be in nice, sparkly apartments. It will be somewhat different. No comment there. But I think there's something really important about us recognizing essentially that we will we will not build the future that serves us all when we are divided. And that's the bottom line. I think that
Right.
we can both agree on. I think that's
I think that is the bottom
common.
line. That absolutely is the bottom line. And my God, there's so much we can unpack, Lucas. And I think I'm going to bring you back for a special where we'll really take a deep dive into all of this. Um, and this series is called Justice Redesigned. And what one of the things I wanted to sort of tease out of you was your ideas about how capitalism can never really truly bring justice. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Oh, what does one begin? I think the problem with capitalism is that some people would disagree with it, I'm sure, but like, if you bear with me for 5 seconds, the problem with capitalism is that it only functions because it steals, right? It
Yes,
functions because of
yes.
the theft, right? So, and people are like, what is it stealing? Like, it doesn't stealing anything from me. I'm like, well, look at your water bill, right? I don't know if you know that. We are still subsidizing oil, and we're still subsidizing gas production, like tune of 12 billion
Mm-hmm.
pounds. Don't quote me on the specific number, but you do feel free to Google it. So they get the money from us, from you and I, right? So I would rather they gave me this 12 billion so I could put a free solar panel on my roof and disconnect the gas, preferably. But clearly that's not going to happen. We can now see more push against renewables, because essentially the capitalism pushes for centralized and monopolized ideas. And when I'm talking about theft, I'm talking about not only theft of labor when the workers are being paid minimum wage. I think in the United States, McDonald's and Walmart are two biggest brands of which employees are on welfare because they can't
Mm-hmm.
afford to live otherwise. That's bizarre. Like, we are having businesses that need employees to be fed by the government so that they don't die. Do you know what I mean? That is just weird.
Mm-hmm.
That one level of theft, right? So they are stealing the labor from the worker, they're paying them nothing, and then they're stealing the government's money that goes directly to the worker so that they can
Mm-hmm.
come back to work tomorrow, right? There's that level of theft. The theft of natural resources. The Nestle has recently been found of exploiting water in water scarcity states across the US, paying $200 a year. I kid you not, Google it. $200 a year for gazillion, billion, quadrillion, I don't even know the number, barrels or gallons of water. I would like that water bill. Thank you very much. Why am I paying $200, or well, in Britain, £200, every 3 months or whatever it is, that I don't have as much water as Nestle, clearly. So there's something weird happening where a massive capital gets access to all our natural resources. And I think Welsh have said it really nicely many, many years ago when Welsh were being exploited by the English. And there was a saying in kind of mining communities that if you steal a sheep, you'll be prosecuted like a thief. But if you steal a mountain, you'll be treated like a lord.
Mm,
And I think there's something really important about us recognizing how weird that is, right? So a lot of those kind of mining industries were actually funded through the profits from slavery and cotton
mhm,
and other atrocious things. There was theft happening across the world, right? The fact that we are having the Teslas of today are built on rare earth minerals, which are mined by children in Congo, right? The theft is happening across the board, right? There's someone somewhere has to pay the price. If you're not paying the price, someone somewhere pays the price, right? And what is even worse is that even if you pay the price, because what was recently found about Gucci and about Dolce & Gabbana and about all those fabulous brands that we all know from high street, well, not from high streets, clearly, not British high street, but like the upper wealthy, is that they were made using a very specific skill sets of people who were actually pre-made in China and just finished in Italy.
mm.
So even if you do pay the price, you're actually still being exploited because they cut the margins. So there's something really weird about the fact that the capitalism does not deliver justice. The capitalism delivers injustice. The capitalism doesn't deliver solutions. The capitalism delivers products. Because let's not kid ourselves that electric cars are not there to save the planet, right? The electric cars are there to serve car industry, right? So like I think we need to step back a little bit and start thinking about whom is it serving? Because the last time I checked, the cars are taking a lot of space. If you can the vehicle the size of 6 cars can carry 100 people. Those 6 cars cannot carry 100 people. Do you know what I mean? Like that's how insane the resource allocation has become under capitalism, because essentially it's all about individualism. It's all about you having your own stuff. And I now live what I like to call a commune. And we share a Hoover and we share a washing machine among several units. And it works fine. Like, if it's busy, I'll do my washing later. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not that deep of a deal. Like, you don't need to have everything in your apartment just for yourself because it's yours. Like it's so interesting how our perspective can shift when we live in different circumstances. And I think very often, I think a lot of that capitalist narrative originates to some. I don't think a lot of it, I don't think all of it, but all of it kind of originates from this idea of survival of the fittest.
Oh, which is
As a
complete. I mean, that's complete
Which is wrong.
misinterpretation. It's a complete misinterpretation in any case. An example just to really kind of back up what you're saying is, do you remember when there was lots of fuss in the media about the Somalian pirates jumping on cruise ships? And it was, sort of reported as, Somalia being the fourth poorest country in the world. And my focus was on, well, how on earth did we build a world where you have a fourth poorest country? That's the better question than how do I keep all my stuff safe?
Yeah, and I think the question is like, what circumstances push those people to, because they're risking
Yeah.
their lives. They're very
Mm,
often, like, watch this film, or actually a lot of,
yeah.
I can't remember what it was called, but it was about this captain of this transport ship, and they were being pirated, and he was kidnapped at one point. And I think the story behind it is that a lot of the time, like, what kind of desperation? And ask it yourself, right? What would have to happen for you to become that person, right? Because
Yes.
that's not in a career brochure in Somalia, I guarantee it to you, right? So what kind of circumstances have to happen? If your family was hungry, your child was starving, your mother didn't have medicine, your father was
Mm,
disabled, like, and you lived in a very violent circumstance where everyone else's experience is
mhm,
very similar, because essentially decades of colonialism and robbery and complete utter destabilization happened, then the circumstances make us who we are. And I think there was something really important about us, sitting in our in our living rooms. I'm having those conversations, being like, that's unacceptable that we
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's unacceptable. People are forced to do this. Like it's not something people choose to do. Like people don't choose to do this kind of career if they've got options. Like, if you do have other options, very often you don't have many options. And people are and and people are always very often happy to board the morality high ground train, like, well, I would never do this. I'm like, well, other people who do say that would be the
We
first one.
don't know what we're capable of if the circumstances present themselves. Um, and I know this very well from sitting in prison, and I've spoken to men who've done, what most people would regard as terrible things to other people. And, one of my points is you can't run a justice system. I mean, you've talked about justice at a much bigger level, about the fact that there's injustice before we even start. So, how do you build a justice system? But, at the level that I'm working at when I'm sitting in prison, the idea that you can look at someone and just look at their crime in isolation of the context of their life, for me, is it's ludicrous. It has no. So the idea that I can just go, every person who takes another person's life goes to prison for 30 years. Some of those people, if you look at the context and the story, are never going to do this again. And some people, you can continue punishing them, and 30 years later, they've learned nothing, but they've finished their sentence and out they go. So for me, as I said, I'm just repeating myself, but you've looked at justice from a much bigger perspective, that, we don't have any justice in the first place. There isn't a stable base of mercy and justice to be able to create a justice system that's ever going to be effective. I think that's really your message. And I'm supporting that, saying, yeah, I see that you cannot separate a crime from the context.
I would agree with it. I also believe that there is something about responsibility for the crime, right?
Absolutely, yes.
I think we are very in the West, we have historically um, very often delegates responsibility for the crime onto the person who commits the crime. It's like, well, you're a bad person, bad you. Unless
Yeah.
you're and Christian, in which case, oh, the circumstances were just so bad. We can see it in US transparently, the research after
Mm-hmm.
research after research proves it. Start Googling it, watch the newspaper. Like, it's clearly, if they'll find the black person's the worst image they can find, and the
Mm-hmm.
white person's the best image they can find, and then they build this narrative around it. Like, it's so bizarre that, like, I every time I'm like, oh, is this what it is? Do you know what I mean? Like, and if they can't find the image, they'll find a different image too.
Mm-hmm.
There was a couple of those as well. So there was something really problematic about the fact, how do we explain, right? And when we look at there was a study that I looked at some time ago, where they looked at a judge's justification for the sentencing in US. And very much when you were a black person, the focus was on, like, the badness of the crime, the badness of you.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Yeah.
It's you who is the person,
Yeah.
who's an issue. When it was a white person, it was always an explanation of, like, oh, I understand your circumstance, kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? So we already know there's this differentiation, right? I strongly believe that we are the victims of the circumstance. And I strongly believe that we have to look at every single crime as a failure of society. Right.
Yes.
What we have not done for this 3-year-old child who loves chocolate and teddy bear cartoons to become that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When you kind of roll back time and you look at them, they're just 3-year-old child that has got all the potential for being a neurosurgeon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they end up killing someone,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Absolutely.
when I was studying my, I think it was third degree, when I was doing my youth work qualifications, we did a unit on childhood, and they compared a very interesting, and I found that was eye-opening. There was a very interesting crime that was being committed both in UK and I do believe that was Norway, might have been Finland, don't quote me. But that's beyond the point. There was a very similar crime of two children who were aged 9 and 8 who murdered a toddler. That happened somewhere in Manchester, I believe, and as I was saying, in one of the Nordic countries. And the response could not be different.
Mhm.
In UK, they were arrested, questioned, so
Mhm.
like all of that was in the Nordic. They first of all did not arrest the child that committed the crime. They introduced psychologists. They offered
Mhm.
psychological help to all of the class, and they reintegrated the child back into the classroom, back into the classroom as soon as they could, with psychological support and help and whatever. And the whole community was surrounded with this care and love and trying to make sure that they are able to reconcile what has happened with those children being now present, in their daily lives, literally with their own children, in the same classroom. Yes, under increased supervision of psychologists and trained staff and what so on and so on so on so on so on, but making sure that they are not put on a scrap heap of humanity, saying, "Well, lock them up, throw away the key," right?
Well, you're pressing a button for me because one of the things I say about prisons is well, interestingly enough, don't forget, I think about 20% of prisoners are on remand, so they might actually be innocent. So, but we love this idea that we've gathered up all the bad people and we've shoved them over there, and now we can carry on our lives. But these are just the people that have been caught, if they're guilty at all. So, there's a, I'm not saying, I do agree that sometimes people need to be removed from society as part of responsibility taking. It's what we do when we remove someone from society that interests me.
Yeah, okay, we are absolutely just weirdly philosophical about it, but like, I. Uh, maybe not murderers, because I think that's a kind of separate conversation. But any other crime except like murder, because murder is a let's leave that to the side for a second. Any other crime, I think if you offered those people who are in prison and you said to them, listen, if you don't do any other crime, we'll pay you £40,000 a year for the time of your sentence, you can establish your life, right? Just saying this is just philosophical. I'm not arguing that this should be a policy, but let's assume that this is good. And you do no crime, right? You'll be naughty, naughty, naughty. Like I guarantee they would not reoffend, because a lot of crime actually comes from poverty, comes from struggle, comes from not being able to meet your basic needs on many levels, right? Very often about circumstance, in terms of like you're exposed to gangs in your locality, and therefore you're kind of like entrapped within that microcosm. So if you said, here, move somewhere else, live your best life, reestablish yourself, I don't know, do a course, give them basic income for a fixed period of time, so they can reestablish their lives and look after their family. I do believe that we would have been a better place than we are now. Because why is it that Netherlands, for instance, is closing prisons, right? And we can't
Yeah,
go quickly enough.
so we're kind of
Like,
running out of time. This is, we've gone further than I imagined, and I love this conversation. And you are coming back for a special. Um, I think that that what you're suggesting. I mean, I think there's merit in what you're suggesting. I would do it very differently. I wouldn't have I wouldn't have a prison where everything's paid for, even though and then it's brutal anyway. I would want to run a prison based on everybody having to make their contribution and look after the ones who are weak and can't, so that you can create a self-sustainable prison that has a zero cost, because there's industry, there's community, there's looking after the ones that can't, and you could actually create community out of prison and give people a real live example of what life could be like.
and maybe introduce some cats. I think they did in one of the countries where they gave
Yeah.
prisoners cats to look after. I'm a big fan of cats, so keep them
Oh, well, we're not going down that route today, but we will
better
do.
place.
I think cats rule the world, because there isn't a Facebook page, a local Facebook page, where people aren't posting pictures of cats that are lost. Or so I think that cats actually have control of all of us, and we just haven't realised it yet. So we're coming to the end of our time. This has been a very rich and very interesting, enlightening discussion. But I have a sort of last final surprise question, if I may. And that is, if I were to give you the keys to the Ministry of Justice today and say, what's the one change you would make immediately, what would you do?
Oh, just one.
Just one, yeah.
Um, how complex can it be? Can it be like as complex?
Anything at all, but it's one change that you can make immediately.
I would change the prisons into like a Dutch model of prisons where actually people are not living this artificial life with no dignity, but actually are able to function within the world which kind of simulates the outside world, right? So
Fantastic, yeah.
Nordic system has got, where you have your own bathroom and you have your own privacy and kind of you treat human with dignity and they behave dignity back. And I think we can see it in those prisons. And if people want to explore that, there was an amazing series on Netflix, which is the world's toughest prisons. It's a lot of them, and you can see the tougher the prison, the worse behaves are the prisoners.
Absolutely.
The nicer the prison, the better they behave. So, do with it what you may.
Amazing. What an amazing discussion. Thank you so much for doing this, Lukasz. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you ever so much for having me. It has been an absolutely interesting conversation, and I'm looking forward to the special that you promised me now. This is now a verbal contract of where
It certainly is.